Hey everyone, if you love scary stories, hit that subscribe button and join the creepy crew. Also, don't forget to like a video and tell me in the comments what time are you watching this now. I never imagined that the search for answers could lead me so deep into a labyrinth of unspeakable sorrow and inexplicable phenomena. Yet, as I stand at the precipice of my memories, I recall the fateful summer when everything changed a time, when an ordinary disappearance unraveled into a mystery that defied all logic. This is the story of the vanishing of Marcus Reed, a bright young man whose sudden disappearance from the sleepy town of Redwood Falls would haunt the community for decades. Marcus was the sort of person who lit up every room he entered. With a gentle smile and an insatiable curiosity about the world, he had dreams that reached far beyond the boundaries of his small hometown. He worked at the local library, a modest building nestled on a quiet street lined with ancient oaks and faded brick facades. Everyone in Redwood Falls knew him. His laughter was familiar, his presence a steady reminder that life, even in its most mundane moments, held sparks of wonder. And yet, one autumn evening, Marcus simply vanished. It was a cool, windswept night when Marcus left the library after closing. His shift had ended early due to a power outage that had swept across the town, plunging us into a temporary darkness that seemed to swallow even the starlight. I remember the murmur among the staff later that neither had said goodbye as usual, promising to meet his friend at the diner on Main Street, but he never arrived. At first, we assumed he had taken a detour, perhaps lost in thought on the way home. Hours later, as the chill of the night deepened and worry began to mount, his absence became a question, then a problem, and finally, a mystery. The next morning, when the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, his car was found abandoned at the edge of the Old Mill Rhoda winding stretch that cut through the dense woods bordering Redwood Falls. The vehicle, a modest hatchback that Marcus had always taken pride in, sat in eerie silence. Its windows were fogged with condensation, and the driver's door hung slightly ajar as if inviting an inspection. When the local sheriff and a small team of volunteers arrived, they found nothing but an unsettling quiet. Inside the car lay a pair of glasses and a crumpled note that read, "I must go where the shadows speak." No one recognized the handwriting, and no one could explain its meaning. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with theories. Some said that Marcus had run away to escape the burdens of his pasta-secret heartbreak, perhaps, or the pressure of dreams too grand for Redwood Falls. Others whispered of a darker possibility, that something unspeakable had taken him. In hushed conversations over coffee at the diner, people recalled strange lights in the woods the previous night, and some even claimed to have seen a lone figure roaming along the mill road long after the car had been discovered. I too felt a chill of foreboding that I could not shake. Driven by both a need for truth and a fascination with the unknown, I began to investigate Marcus's last known movements. I combed through his journal pages filled with sketches of the stars, scribbled notes on ancient legends, and musings about the boundaries between life and death. In one entry, he wrote of a dream in which a whispering presence beckoned him toward a forgotten trail deep in the woods' path that, according to local lore, was haunted by the spirits of those who had been lost long ago. My investigation led me to the outskirts of town, to a narrow, overgrown trail that wound its way through towering pines and moss-draped oaks. The air here was thick with moisture and mystery, and every step seemed to echo with the voices of the past. I followed the trail for what felt like hours, my flashlight beam dancing over gnarled roots and ancient stone markers half swallowed by nature. At length, I came upon an old, crumbling stone archway, inscribed with symbols that resembled those from Marcus's journal. Beyond the arch, the woods opened into a small clearing, where the moonlight revealed a nearly forgotten cemetery. Weathered tombstones leaned at odd angles, and ivy clung desperately to their surfaces, as if to hold the memories in place. In that clearing, I felt as though I had crossed a threshold. A profound silence rang, a silence broken only by the rustle of wind through dead leaves and the distant call of an owl. I knelt beside one of the gravestones, reading the faded inscription. The name Elias Winter was etched there, along with dates that suggested a life cut short by an unknown tragedy. Something about the connection between Elias and the symbols on the arch sent a shiver down my spine. I recalled Marcus's words about where the shadows speak, and I wondered if Marcus had intended to meet the ghost of Elias Winterman, whose story had been buried under layers of time and neglect. Days turned into sleepless nights as I delved deeper into Redwood Falls' forgotten history. I interviewed elderly residents, pored over town records, and even managed to visit the archives at the local historical society. Piece by piece, a portrait emerged of a family once prominent in the Towner family that had been ensnared by misfortune, scandal, and the inexplicable disappearance of one of its own. There were rumors that Elias Winter had been involved in occult practices, that he had sought to harness the powers of the beyond to cheat fate. His untimely death was shrouded in mystery, and his name had been cursed ever since. One particularly cold night, as a bitter wind whipped through the empty streets of Redwood Falls, I received an anonymous letter. The envelope was unmarked, and the handwriting was jagged and desperate. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper bearing a short, chilling message. The shadows know the truth. They will reveal it when the time is right. No return address, no explanation, only a feeling that I was being drawn into a secret far larger than I had ever imagined. Haunted by the letter and driven by an urgency I could not ignore, I returned to the cemetery at midnight. Under a sky heavy with storm clouds, I wandered among the tombstones, each one a silent testament to lives that had slipped away. I found myself at the foot of Elias Winter's grave once again. There the ground was soft and damp, and a subtle breeze carried the scent of decay mixed with the faint aroma of wildflowers, a paradoxical reminder of life, persisting in the face of death. As I knelt to trace the name with trembling fingers, I heard Ita's soft, deliberate tapping that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was not the patter of rain or the rustling of leaves, but a measured, rhythmic sound that resonated deep in my chest. I followed the sound with my eyes until they landed on a low stone marker near the edge of the graveyard. The marker was new, almost out of place among the ancient tombstones. Etched into it were the words Marcus Reed, along with a date that marked the night of his disappearance. My heart pounded as I realized that Marcus's fate was intertwined with the legacy of Elias Winter and the dark, hidden forces that had long haunted this town. In that moment, the cemetery seemed to come alive with whispers of the past, the voices of those who had been lost, calling out to me, pleading for their stories to be told. Over the next few months, I became consumed by the mystery of Marcus Reed. I found myself drawn to the cemetery night after night, recording every sound, every whisper, every flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. The townsfolk began to regard my investigations with a mix of pity and suspicion. After all, Redwood Falls was a quiet place where old legends were best left undisturbed. Yet, I could not rest until I had uncovered the truth. I interviewed Marcus's friends and colleagues, scoured his belongings for clues, and even consulted with a local psychic reputed to speak with the dead. The psychic's words were a cryptica series of images and emotions that conveyed loss, betrayal, and an inescapable fate. She told me that Marcus had seen something in the woods that he could not unsee, that he had borne witness to a convergence of past and present, and that his disappearance was not random, but the culmination of a long-brewing curse. One frigid night, as the wind howled like the wails of the damned, I returned once more to the cemetery with a resolve born of desperation. Clutching a small tape recorder and a notebook filled with my frantic observations, I sat by the grave of Elias Winter beneath a skeletal tree. The darkness around me was absolute, punctuated only by the ghostly light of a crescent moon. I closed my eyes and listened not just with my ears, but with every fiber of my being, to the sounds of the night. And then I heard it again, the tapping, soft at first, then growing steadily louder until it was a relentless pulse that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. My hands shook as I fumbled to start the recorder, desperate to capture this moment. In that eerie silence, as the wind carried the voices of lost souls, I felt the unmistakable presence of something otherworldly, a force that was neither malevolent nor benign, but simply ancient and beyond our understanding. I do not know if I ever truly uncovered what became of Marcus Reed. His disappearance remains one of Redwood Falls' most enduring mysterious, a case that has left scars on the community and a lingering question in my soul. What happens when the shadows of the past reach out to claim the future? The cemetery still holds its secrets, and every time I pass by, I swear I can hear the soft tapping of footsteps and the whisper of voices calling out in the dark. Even now, years later, I find that on quiet nights when the wind is right, I am drawn back to the edge of that cemetery, to the place where the forgotten and the vanished linger in eternal twilight. Marcus Reed's story has become a cautionary tale, a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, that the price of uncovering the truth may be far greater than we can bear. And as I drive away from Redwood Falls, the image of a lone figure standing among the gravestones, bathed in the pale light of a dying moon, remains etched in my memory, a silent testament to the shadows of the vanished. There is a place in the world where the line between reality and nightmare is perilously thin, a place where the past is never truly gone, and where the echoes of lost souls reverberate in the silence of forgotten corridors. For years, I had been fascinated by the legends surrounding Black Ridge Point, a desolate stretch of coastline in northern Maine that was said to harbor secrets too terrible to speak of. Drawn by a mixture of academic curiosity and a desire to escape the monotony of my everyday life, I set out one winter to uncover the truth behind the many unsolved disappearances that had plagued the area. Black Ridge Point was a study in contrasts. By day, the rugged cliffs and crashing waves presented a wild, unyielding beauty, a testament to nature's raw power and timeless persistence. But as dusk fell, the landscape transformed into something far more sinister. The crashing waves turned into mournful laments, and the cliffs, shrouded in mist, seemed to hide secrets in their ancient stone. Locals spoke of eerie lights dancing over the water at night, of disembodied voices carried on the wind, and of a mysterious presence that haunted the point. I had heard these stories many times before, dismissed them as the product of overactive imaginations and the isolation of a harsh, unforgiving land. Yet as I stood on the windswept shore, the salty air prickling my skin, I could not shake the feeling that something was watching. I had come to Black Ridge Point armed with little more than my notebook, a digital recorder, and an insatiable thirst for answers. I rented a small, weather-beaten cottage in the nearby town of Greyhaven, a town whose inhabitants eyed outsiders with suspicion and whispered of tragedies that were best left unspoken. The cottage itself was modest, its wooden walls creaking with every gust of wind, and its single window offering a panoramic view of the abyss below. The nights were long and bitterly cold, and I found solace only in the quiet determination to unravel the mysteries that had haunted this place for decades. My investigation began with the local archives. In the dusty back room of Greyhaven's library, I pored over old newspaper clippings, court records, and faded photographs that chronicled a series of disappearances spanning nearly 50 years. One name recurred with unsettling frequency, a young woman named Eliza Hart, whose vanishing had remained unexplained despite exhaustive searches. Eliza was described as vibrant and full of life, a beacon of hope in a small community that had known more than its share of hardship. Her sudden disappearance on a bitter winter night had shattered the town's fragile peace, and over the years, her case had become a legend, a ghost story whispered to children as a cautionary tale. As I read through the faded accounts and scribbled notes, I began to sense a pattern, a series of inexplicable events that connected the missing to the dark, swirling mists that rose from Black Ridge Point. In the days that followed, I ventured out to the point itself. Clad in heavy layers and armed with a flashlight, I traversed the narrow, rocky path that wound its way to the edge of the cliffs. The wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, and the waves below pounded the shore with relentless fury. As I approached the edge, I noticed something that made my blood run colder. Series of footprints pressed into the wet, muddy ground, leading from the shoreline toward a small cave hidden behind a veil of ivy. The footprints were small, almost childlike, yet they were accompanied by larger, more deliberate prints that suggested a struggle or a hasty retreat. I followed the trail with cautious determination, my heart thundering in my ears as I entered the shadowed mouth of the cave. Inside, the cave was a cavern of darkness, its walls slick with moisture, and littered with ancient, undecipherable symbols etched into the stone. I could barely make out the outlines of figures that seemed to dance along the walls in the flickering beam of my flashlight. The air was thick, with an otherworldly chill, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. I pressed on, driven by the need to understand what had drawn so many souls to vanish in this forsaken place. Deep within the cave, I discovered a small alcove where remnants of what appeared to be a campsite lay beneath a faded scarf, a rusted tin cup, and a scrap of paper with hastily scribbled words that read, "Do not trust the whispers." The message, though cryptic, resonated with the tales I had heard from the locals, tales of voices that lured the unwary into the abyss. Over the following weeks, my nights at the cottage were plagued by dreams that blurred the boundary between sleep and waking. I dreamed of a spectral woman in a tattered dress, her eyes empty yet filled with a profound sorrow, calling my name from the depths of the ocean. I dreamt of shadowy figures moving silently along the cliffs, of voices that whispered secrets in a language older than time. Each morning I would awaken drenched in sweat, the haunting images seared into my mind. The digital recorder I had brought with me began to capture faint murmurs and unidentifiable sounds during the night and eerie symphony of whispers and rustling that I could not explain. I became obsessed with deciphering the recordings, spending hours analyzing each faint syllable, hoping to find a clue that would unlock the mystery of Black Ridge Point. One night, as a fierce storm raged outside and the winds battered the cottage with unbridled fury, I sat by the window, transfixed by the wild dance of lightning over the churning sea. In that moment of raw, elemental chaos, I heard a slow, deliberate tapping on the front door. My pulse quickened. Who could be out on a night like this? I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Gathering my courage, I approached the door and opened it a crack. There, in the doorway, stood a man whose face was obscured by a hood. His eyes, however, shone with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He did not speak. He only extended his hand slowly, palm open, as if offering something. In that silent gesture, I sensed a profound sorrow and an unspoken warning. I stepped back, heart pounding, and the man melted into the storm, leaving behind only the echo of his presence and the lingering scent of salt and decay. In the days that followed, I learned that the man was known to the locals as the warden of Black Ridge Point, mysterious figure rumored to be the keeper of the lost souls who had vanished along the cliffs. His appearances were rare, brief, and always shrouded in mystery. The townsfolk spoke of him in hushed tones, some claiming he was a ghost, others insisting he was very much alive but burdened with secrets too heavy to share. I began to wonder if he held the key to understanding the curse that had claimed so many lives, including that of Eliza Hart, whose story had become a tragic legend in Greyhaven. Driven by an insatiable need to uncover the truth, I delved deeper into the history of Black Ridge Point. I met with retired police officers, local historians, and even a reclusive medium who claimed to have communicated with the spirits of the vanished. Each conversation only deepened the enigma. The medium spoke of an ancient Forsay primordial presence that dwelled in the mists and the crashing waves, feeding on the grief and fear of those who dared approach its domain. She described a ritual, long forgotten, that could either appease or enrage this force, and she warned me that some doors, once opened, should never be closed. As I pieced together the fragments of history, I began to suspect that my own fate was inexorably linked to the curse of Black Ridge Point. I started receiving anonymous note-crumpled pieces of paper left on my doorstep with messages like, "Beware the whispers," and "The abyss knows your name." The more I uncovered, the more the town's dark legacy seemed to close in around me, as if the very land were conspiring to keep its secrets hidden. In quiet moments, I could feel a cold presence behind me, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. One particularly harrowing evening, after a day of relentless investigation, I found myself alone on the windswept cliff overlooking the turbulent sea. The moon hung low and pale in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows over the jagged rocks. I sat on the edge, the wind whipping my hair, and allowed the desolation of the moment to wash over me. It was there, in that raw solitude, that I heard Ita low, mournful chant carried on the wind, a sound that seemed to rise from the very depths of the abyss. The chant was hypnotic, almost seductive, and for a moment I felt as though I were being called to join those lost souls whose voices had echoed through the ages. I did not follow the call that night. Instead, I retreated to my cottage, my mind a maelstrom of terror and fascination. In the days that followed, the recordings on my digital device grew louder and clearer cacophony of voices, some pleading, others warning, all intertwined with the relentless rhythm of the waves. I listened to them over and over, desperate to decipher their meaning, but the messages remained elusive, shrouded in an ancient, impenetrable gloom. I soon realized that the mystery of Blackridge Point was not a simple puzzle to be solved, but a living, breathing entity of force that transcended time and defied human understanding. It was as if the point itself was a repository of lost dreams and shattered hopes, a place where every disappearance, every unanswered question had left an indelible mark on the fabric of reality. My investigation took on an almost obsessive quality as I began to document every detail, the patterns of the winds, the subtle changes in the landscape, the cryptic messages left by those who had come before me. I compiled my notes into a journal, the pages filled with sketches, recordings, and desperate pleas for understanding. I was convinced that the key to breaking the curse lay somewhere hidden within these fragments of memory, buried in the depths of a past that refused to die. Then, on a night that seemed to congeal all of my fears into a single unbearable moment, I experienced a final, shattering revelation. I awoke in the dead of night to find the journal lying open on my desk, as if placed there by unseen hands. The pages were scrawled with a frantic, almost illegible script that repeated the words, "The abyss takes all," over and over. In that moment, as thunder rumbled in the distance and lightning illuminated the crooked outlines of the trees outside, I understood that I had reached the end of the line. The curse of Blackridge Point was not something I could escape. It had latched onto my soul, its whispers echoing in the darkest corners of my mind. I left Greyhaven the next morning, my heart heavy with the weight of all that I had seen and heard. As I drove away, the image of the spectral figure on the cliffside, bathed in the pale light of a dying moon, stayed with me a silent, eternal reminder of a mystery that was far bigger than any one person. Blackridge Point remains, shrouded in mist and memory, its secrets guarded by the relentless rhythm of the tides and the whisper of the wind. And though I have tried to build a new life far from that haunted shore, I know that the abyss will always call out to those with the courage and the cursed to listen. I never believed that the past could reach out and haunt you until I found myself drawn to the long-abandoned town of Millhaven, a place where time seemed to have stopped and where every whispered secret clung to the crumbling walls like stubborn ivy. It was said that Millhaven was once a thriving mining community, a bustling hub of industry, and hope nestled in the shadow of towering mountains. But as the veins of ore ran dry and the fortunes dwindled, the town was slowly left to decay, its residents fading into memory like ghosts vanishing with the morning mist. I had heard the legend stories of unexplained disappearances, of restless spirits wandering deserted streets, and of eerie echoes that could be heard when the wind was just right. My curiosity, once a quiet ember, blazed into an irresistible flame, compelling me to seek the truth hidden in the ruins of Millhaven. I arrived on a bleak autumn afternoon, the sky a dull canvas of gray, and the cold wind carrying the scent of rust and decay. The road to Millhaven was little more than a forgotten trail winding through dense, untamed woods. As I neared the town, the outlines of weathered buildings emerged from the Gluma General Store with broken windows, a church whose steeple had long since lost its spire, and rows of dilapidated houses that looked as if they had been abandoned overnight. The silence was profound, disturbed only by the crunch of my boots on scattered gravel and the occasional distant cry of a lone crow. I checked into what remained of the old boarding house at the edge of town, a structure so worn that even the floorboards seemed to sigh under the weight of its history. The owner, an elderly man with haunted eyes, offered me a cryptic warning as he handed over the key. Some echoes here are best left undisturbed. I couldn't tell if he was speaking of mere memories or something far more sinister, but his tone was enough to set my nerves on edge. I set my bag down in a sparse room with peeling wallpaper and a single grimy window that offered a view of the overgrown main street. The air inside was heavy with dust and the lingering sorrow of those who once called this place home. That first night in Millhaven, I struggled to sleep. Every creak of the building, every rustle in the dark seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. I lay awake in the dim light of a flickering lamp, listening to the wind howl like a chorus of lost souls. Eventually, sleep claimed me, but my dreams were troubled by fragmented images of a girl running barefoot across a barren lot, a shadowy figure watching from a broken doorway, and a voice, barely a whisper, pleading for help. I awoke with the first hints of dawn to a persistent sound that made my skin crawl, a slow, deliberate tapping coming from somewhere beyond the thin walls of my room. At first, I assumed it was the building settling, or perhaps the wind playing tricks on my ears. But as the tapping persisted, rhythmic and unyielding, I realized it was not random. It was almost as if someone or something was trying to communicate. I gathered my courage and stepped outside. The air was cold and damp, and a thin layer of fog was beginning to form on the deserted street. I followed the sound, which seemed to be emanating from the direction of the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cemetery was a solemn field of crooked headstones and ancient, weather-beaten mausoleums. It exuded a quiet dignity and a profound sadness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I walked among the gravestones, the tapping grew louder, echoing in the stillness. I paused before a particularly large stone engraved with the name Evelyn Moore. The stone was half obscured by ivy and moss, and the inscription was worn smooth by time. In that moment, I felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the cold. I couldn't help but wonder if the stone itself was trying to speak, if the memories of those interred here were stirring to life. Over the following days, I immersed myself in the history of Millhaven. I visited the local library, a dusty, forgotten building with shelves of brittle newspapers and yellow document sand poured over records that chronicled the town's decline. I learned that Millhaven had once been a beacon of hope during the mining boom, but that a series of mysterious disappearances had haunted its later years. One case in particular caught my attention: the vanishing of Lydia Carter, a young woman whose radiant smile and kind heart had once been the pride of the town. She had been reported missing on a bitter winter night nearly 40 years ago, and despite extensive searches, no trace of her had ever been found. Some whispered that her spirit still wandered the streets of Millhaven, unable to find peace. I began to sense a connection between Lydia's story and the strange tapping I had heard. The idea that the echoes of the past were not simply memories, but active, restless forces. One evening, determined to uncover more, I visited the dilapidated remains of what had once been Lydia's Homea modest wooden house on the outskirts of town. The building was nearly consumed by decay. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, I found remnants of a life abruptly halted: a faded photograph of a smiling young woman, a dusty diary filled with entries of hope and despair, and a single, fragile necklace with a small pendant shaped like a heart. I spent hours there, tracing my fingers over the delicate engravings and whispering silent prayers for the lost soul who once dwelled within these walls. As I left, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have remained buried. In the following nights, the disturbances escalated. I began to experience vivid visions of Lydia wandering through a shadowed landscape, her eyes wide with sorrow, her voice echoing my own unspoken fears. I woke to find my journal filled with frantic scribbles as if I had been writing in my sleep. One entry read, "The echoes are calling. I must go to where the forgotten reside." I felt compelled to follow this cryptic message, even as a deep instinctive fear told me that some secrets were meant to remain hidden. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing dread, I decided to explore the outskirts of Millhaven more thoroughly. I discovered an overgrown path leading away from the cemetery and into a dense thicket of trees. The path was narrow and treacherous, its edges blurred by the encroaching fog. I walked slowly, my senses heightened, every rustle of leaves and snapping twig echoing like a warning. After what felt like hours, I arrived at a clearing where an ancient stone arch stood. The arch was covered in intricate carving symbols that I had seen in the pages of old occult books, and it marked the entrance to what appeared to be a long-forgotten ritual site. In the center of the clearing lay a shallow pool of stagnant water that reflected the arch in a distorted, eerie mirror image. I knelt by the pool and peered into its depths. At first, all I saw was my own reflection, distorted by ripples. But then, slowly, a shape began to form in the murk of vague, spectral figure, almost like a wisp of smoke emerging from the darkness. My heart pounded as I stared, unable to tear my eyes away. The figure seemed to be beckoning me, its form shifting and dissolving into the shadows, only to reappear moments later. I felt a profound sadness emanating from it, a sorrow that transcended time. I realized that this might be the echo of Lydia, or perhaps another lost soul whose story had been swallowed by the relentless march of time. Haunted by the encounter, I returned to the boarding house with a mind awash in questions and an overwhelming sense of foreboding. That night, as I sat by the window watching the fog roll in from the mountains,